Hello, welcome back to the kitchen. Today we're going to be making a recipe called Welsh cakes, which I like to make because I am actually a little bit Welsh. One of my great-grandmothers was half Welsh, half Irish, and she was actually from a coal mining family. And this recipe for Welsh cakes is, they're little cakes that you cook on a griddle. So that's why we can make them here at the library, even though we don't have a stove at the library. So they're sort of like a mix between a cookie and a pancake. You'll see. And they were actually popular to give to kids to take in their lunches or to give to the miners for their lunch when they went into work. Okay, and I'm sorry to any Welsh speakers if I'm getting this wrong. I have studied some Welsh pronunciation, but I'm not an expert. In Welsh, it is Bach. So that's what we're going to make today. Our ingredients are flour. I'm using whole wheat like I always do. You can use whatever flour you want. Sugar, 1 egg, a little salt, baking powder, cinnamon, and butter. And finally we have fruit that goes in that. The recipe calls for sultanas. Sultanas is another name for golden raisins. You could also probably use regular raisins. What I used to do was get a can of peaches, like canned peaches that are canned in juice, not syrup. And then I would just drain them on a towel and cut them up and use that instead, because I think it's nice with, if the fruit's not dried, I like that. But what I chose to do this time is I picked out some fruit from the frozen fruit that we had the other week, and I just thawed it out, and now I'm draining it on this towel. So I have here some formerly frozen peaches and mangoes. Alright, so let's get started. This calls for a 1/2 cup of butter. So if you look at the butter, it's got markings on it. So this is a 1/4 cup. So a 1/4 cup plus a 1/4 cup is 1/2 cup, aka 1 stick is 1/2 cup. So we need to make this a little bit more, it's been in the refrigerator. Really when you're baking, you're supposed to start with ingredients that are room temperature. So, and also this butter is going to be way too hard to mix up with our other ingredients. So we're going to put it in the microwave for just a little tiny bit. Not enough to melt it, just to make it more mixable. Okay, I'm going to do 1 minute on 50% power. Alright, the other thing this recipe calls for is self-rising flour. Self-rising flour, I have never seen that in any store in a wheat version, so I'm following the instructions for how to make your own self-rising flour, which is 1 cup of self-rising flour equals 1 cup of flour, 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda, and 1/2 teaspoon salt. So I have to double that because I need 2 cups of self-rising flour. Alright, so that was a little bit too long, but we'll still be alright. So let's set this aside for a second. We can actually even put it in the refrigerator, so it won't be as hot when we add it. And everybody's microwave is different, so you might just have to experiment and see what works for you. For making your butter maybe softer but not actually melted. Alright, I'm using up the last of this bag here. Let's move this down so you can get a better view. now we can open this newer bag. Alright, so when you're measuring flour, it's going to be a little hard to see. So I just have it heaped up in the cup. Now you don't ever want to pack the flour down because you want it to be light and fluffy. So we're just going to run this knife across the edge of the cup to level it off. And I'm going to do that inside the bag so I don't make a big mess. Alright, so you can see I just ran the knife over the top and now it's level. So I'm going to put it in my mixing container here. So that was a half cup. And I still need 2 cups of this. So I couldn't find the whole cup, so I'm using a half cup. So half cup was a half cup, that's 1 cup. Now I need 1 more whole cup. Oh, and I usually just kind of go like, and then run it off over straight. There. Alright, so that is 2 complete cups of flour. So now we need to do 1.5 teaspoons baking powder times 2, so that is going to be 3 teaspoons. Of baking powder. You just want to, if you're not familiar with baking, there is baking powder, which is what this is, and there's baking soda, which usually comes in a rectangular orange cardboard box. They are 2 different ingredients. You don't want to mix up one for the other, so you just want to pay attention to what your recipe calls for. This one is calling for baking powder, so 1. And the can actually has this little handy dandy thing here that allows you, so you don't need a knife to level it, you just scrape it against that to make it level. 2. 3. Alright, and now we need 1.5 teaspoons of salt multiplied by 2, so that's gonna, oh sorry, I misread that. It's a half teaspoon of salt multiplied 2, so 1 whole teaspoon. See if that's enough. Yeah, that's good. Alright. Alright, so this is going to be our self-rising flour. So we need to whisk this together. Actually, one thing I like to do when I'm working with whole wheat flour, because whole wheat flour is more dense than the white flour, it's better for you, but it is more dense. So sometimes people have trouble if they try to substitute it. I've never really had a problem, but what I do is I take out a big pinch of the flour and then I whisk it, so that makes it lighter. So normally what they tell you to do with whole wheat flour is to run it through a sifter. I'm too lazy to do that, and this is much easier and it has the same effect. If you just take out a big pinch of your flour and then whisk it up, it's going to be pretty much just as light and fluffy as if you had sifted it. Alright, so now our recipe says rub flour, butter, and sugar to fine crumbs. So I will explain to you what in the world that means, but first let's measure out our sugar. It's calling for a half cup of sugar. Right? That's not sugar. pack this down either. The only ingredient that I know of that you really have to pack down for baking is brown sugar, which we're not using for this, so just level it off. And now we need our butter. Waste any butter. Alright, so when they say rub it to find crumbs, you could actually rub it with your hands. I think that's what they did before they had these. So we're going to use this. This is called a pastry cutter, or some people call it a pastry blender. Some people don't even use it for pastry, they use it for meatloaf. So it has a lot of uses, but we're going to use this to get our butter and flour combined into fine crumbs, like they say. So this recipe is kind of nice because if you don't have a mixer, like an electric mixer, you don't really need it because it's not calling for you to use a mixer. So don't try that, it won't turn out right. You actually have to do this to get the butter and the dry ingredients mixed together. And you can see that it is starting to look sort of crumbly. But it's not even yet because we still have big hunks of butter and a bunch of flour that's not blended. So we're going to keep blending it like this. Look, get back in there. Okay. Oops. I'm going to put this down so I can finish this. I'm going to scrape down my sides a bit to get the parts that are sort of getting stuck in the corners to move into the middle so I can get them all blended. Alright, and you can see that it looks kind of like coarse sand, like if you're building a sand castle at the beach. That's how it should look. So let's move on to our next step. Alright, add spice. So the spice is our cinnamon, and which is calling for a pinch. Always put in extra cinnamon. That is my tip. Doesn't hurt to put in more cinnamon. So I'm going to put in a heaping half teaspoon instead of just a pinch. Alright, now it says, I'm going to blend that in just a little bit here. Alright, it says to make a well in the center, and then we're going to add the egg and the fruit. So what they mean by that is, scrape some of the goo off this. Alright, this is what they mean. So we have our ingredients here. We're going to make it so there's a little well in the center, just like that. And that's where we're going to put in our wet ingredients, which is the egg and the fruit. So our egg is calling for 1 large beaten egg. So that means we can't just plop the egg in there. We need to beat the egg first before we add it to this. So if you have a compost pile, you should definitely compost the egg shell, because that is great for especially tomatoes. It keeps the tomatoes from getting blossom end rot, you know, where that bottom of the tomato just starts to turn black. That is blossom end rot, and having lots of calcium in the soil prevents that. So if you get eggshells and put it either in your compost or just plant the eggshells directly in the hole when you first plant the tomato, that prevents that. Okay, that's my tip. Now I'm going to wash my hands because I just touched raw egg. Alright, I'm going to whisk this up. Alright, there we go. 1 beaten egg. And the fruit. So, here's our fruit. Now we do need to cut this up a bit, because some of these pieces are kind of big. Okay, I think better now. There we go. Paper towel flavored cookies. There we go. Alright, so now we have added our egg and our fruit into the well in the middle. Our next step is mix to a firm dough. Then roll out a 1/4 inch thick. Whoa. Just splattered you with Welsh cakes dough. Alright. Now let's see if this is actually going to be a dough. Alright, so it is starting to form into a dough, but there's still a lot of crumblies along the edge, so I'm going to keep trying to get those to form into the dough. Just by squishing everything together. Because if it was really too dry, I could add a little milk or water. but I don't really want to do that unless I have to. I don't want to mess with the recipe that way unless I really have to. Alright, I think this is going to be alright. Alright, so there, it's all pretty much into a dough. Now we're going to roll it out to a 1/4 inch thick. So that means first we have to flour our surface. Also means I have to get all this gunk off my hands. Alright, so we're going to flour our surface. This is our surface, and all this stuff is annoying me, so let me put some of this away real quick. Take a little bit of flour like this and just sift it over our work area like this. So like that, and now we're going to take our dough . Get all these little crumblies out of the pan and force them to become one with the dough. Just folding it over to seal in those crumblies. Alright, so now we're going to roll out to a 1/4 inch. Guess who forgot to bring a rolling pin? Alright, we're going to pat it out to a 1/4 inch. A little flour on my hands if it starts to stick. Yeah, that looks like about a 1/4 inch to me. Okay, so from the tip of my finger to there, that is an inch, so that is a 1/2 inch, that is about a 1/4 inch, and that's about how thick it is right now. So you cut these out either with a biscuit cutter or you just use the rim of a glass. Alright, and now we're going to get our griddle heated up here, and I also want to put a little bit of oil on the griddle. Okay, so our next step is to cook the Welsh cakes on a griddle, which I have here, and I'm just going to add a little bit of, I have olive oil here, I'm just going to add a tiny bit onto here. And spread it around. have decided to use this teacup to cut out my biscuits. I'm just going to try and get them as close together so I don't waste my dough. Right now I have the griddle set on medium-low. Alright, so I'm just picking up a cake and putting it onto the griddle. Alright, so they are already starting to get a little bit brown on the one side, so I'm going to flip them over. It's only been about a minute since I put them down, so they're going pretty quick right now. I'm going to turn that down just a little, and I'm going to roll out this dough, or pat it out, again. Anytime it starts to stick a little bit, just get a little flour, rub it on your hands and let it fall down, the extra fall down onto the dough. Try not to do too much flour at a time because you can kind of make the dough tough and chewy if you put in a whole lot of extra flour that's not supposed to be there. But just a little is fine. Alright, we're going to cut out our biscuits again. Let's check on these. Alright, you can see this is the side that was on the bottom first, so you can see how brown it started to get. And then you can see just now when I flipped it, this is the side that's currently, back there, that's currently facing the griddle, so that's not brown enough yet. Alright, I'm going to turn it back up a little tiny bit now and just see what it does. I do still have a little bit of the dough here, so I'm going to roll it out again. Put these aside so they don't get in the way. Let's check our roll again. Okay, that's the first one I put down. It's still a little pale on this side, so we're going to cook it a little more. And each time I pat it out, I'm using my finger to kind of judge if it's a 1/4 inch thick or not. If you don't like that method, you could actually get a ruler and just measure it. But that's about a 1/4 inch thick, approximately. And then when the dough starts to get too small to actually roll it out and do a last cut, I actually just do the last one into a little circle by hand. And then at this point it's got a good bit of extra flour in it, so it doesn't quite want to stick together. but that's normal for the last little bit. All right, there. That's our last Welsh cake. If you have a lot of trouble with the dough sticking to your hands, you might want to try running your hands under cold water and then dry them off, obviously, because you do need cool hands for baking, like especially for baking that involves rolling out and touching the dough. Cooled hands are good. Alright, one of the little idiosyncrasies of these electrical skillets is that once it hits the target temperature, it stops heating up. So, and then you might wonder why your stuff is never getting done. So I'm going to turn it up just enough to make the light come back on again, because it seemed like, yeah, these aren't really progressing as fast as they were at the beginning. I don't know if you can see that. So let's try this now. Okay, I just flipped them all over and you can see this is what the undersides look like. So it kind of varies by where on the griddle they were, which means this surface is not heating evenly, which is kind of a common problem with electric skillets, but oh well. So I'm going to move the ones that got extra brown over to the edges, and the ones that didn't quite as brown into the middle. Because it seems that the middle is the hot part right now. Okay, I'm currently checking these to see how they're doing. I think that one might be done. That one could probably go a little more. This has turned itself off again. Right now I have it between 3 and 4 on the dial here. If you're doing this on a stovetop, I would say just start with it on medium. Or if you have whatever the medium number is, if you have 1 to 10, start it on 5, and then just see how it goes. I think this one is done. Oops. That one maybe could go a little bit. That one could go a little longer. That one's probably done. That's probably done. Go a little longer. And this one might be done. Alright, so let's put these ones that I thought were probably done up here on our tray. Now normally you should put these on one of those metal cooling racks, you know, that looks like a grid, but I don't have one of those here, so I'm putting them directly on top of this glass plate on top of a metal microwave, so hopefully that will provide enough air circulation that they can finish cooling the rest of the way up here. And I'm going to put some more of our friends onto the griddle. I'm going to take these last few off that needed a few more minutes. Alright, so our Welsh cakes are done. And basically I just kept checking them and flipping them until they seem to be done on both sides. If you do have the option to use a stovetop, I would recommend that just because it's slightly less annoying than using the electric griddle. The recipe does recommend using a heavy griddle or heavy frying pan, like a cast iron pan if you have it, or if not, just any heavy frying pan on the stovetop. That would also work. Alright, I hope you enjoyed our time in the kitchen today, and see you next week. Bye!